Okay, how many of you have read the book? Okay. You don't have to have read the book for this. It would be nice, but you don't have to. This is the book we're going to be discussing. It's called Changing the Conversation, A Third Way for Congregations. It's by Anthony Robinson. And Tony is a friend of mine. He's also a close friend of Martin Copenhaver's. And years ago, he was the senior minister at Shepherd of the Hills Church, where I was 2 years ago. I don't think that was a good senior shepherd experience for him or for them. But he's a quality guy. I've just mentioned that to recognize that, not every quality person's going to fit in every quality place. Sometimes you have a misfit or something's going on in your life at that time or whatever, and it just doesn't work out. That's it. I mean, it's sort of like marriage. Every once in a while, you get in one that just ain't going to work. You do your best, but then, you move on. All right, I want to begin. I think this book is excellent. Let me establish the context of what I'm doing. I've agreed to teach it. I'm willing to teach this book, lead discussion groups in other venues, because I think taking on some of the material in this book and contextualizing it for Beatitudes Church is what we really have to do if we hope to rebirth this church. And I use the term rebirth intentionally because churches have a life cycle, just like we do. And 6, 7, 8 years ago, this church was at the point in the life cycle. Well, let me back up. Back when this church came out of Bud Brown's barn, you didn't need as much staff in the beginning because all of you and many were young and excited, and you did everything for your church. And then you go through adolescence, you got all that energy and stuff, and then you come to maturity, and that's this church in the 60s and 70s. And then you come around to the point where the church needs to revitalize. And this church needed a revitalizing process back around 2000, 2006. Well, it's been a tough 6, 7 years since then. We all know that. I'm not casting dispersions at anyone. It wasn't a good series of years for this church. And this church now needs more than revitalization. It needs rebirth. And by rebirth, I'm really talking about going back to the founding principles of the church, the founding narrative, the founding story, going back to Bud Brown's barn and saying, is what we believed then what we believe now? Is what motivated us then motivate us now? Is this our story now? What is our passion? What is our hope? What is that to which we're willing to commit ourselves unreservedly? Who are we? Who do we want to be? What obstacles have gotten in our way along the way? Are they obstacles that can be removed? What do we want from here on going forward? What's the important stuff to us? Programming for seniors, programming for young people. But who are we and how do we recreate this church in a way that we're not living off past generosity, but we're flourishing and paying our way now as we go forward? Do those issues make sense? Do you think those are legitimate issues for this congregation at this point in time? Okay, that's what I do. I'm not a church manager. If the church is running on all 8 cylinders, you don't need me. That's not my specialty. My specialty is to take a 400 cubic inch V8 engine that's running on 4 cylinders and help it to run on 8. Okay, that's what I do, and that's what I love doing. Once it's running on all the cylinders, I get bored. Okay, all right, the book. Tony Robinson begins with in an introduction. He talks about closed-set churches and open-set churches. And closed-set churches are those churches where when you go and join them, you sign on for exactly what you believe. And it has to be consistent with what they believe. You follow me? If you're a member of that church, you know what you're supposed to believe. And I'm not being pejorative here. I'm being descriptive. You know what I'm talking about? In the conservative, many of the conservative churches, by its very nature, they have a series of what they would call fundamentals. These are the things that we believe here at blank blank church. Okay? That's a closed set church. The strength of that is everybody knows what they believe. It gives you a strong sense of concreteness about when we say you're welcome here. It's real clear what here means. The open set church is on the other end of the spectrum. The open set church, have you ever heard someone say, I have literally heard this in a number of different places. It drives me batty. But they say, come and join us, you can believe anything that you want. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come and join us, you can believe anything you want. That's an open set church. Every morning, on Sunday mornings, I say, wherever you are, wherever you've been, you are what?
Welcome here.
Okay, is everybody welcome?
No.
Yes.
Maybe not everybody, but most everybody is. But what is here?
Yeah.
What's the here mean? If this was North Phoenix Baptist, and again, I'm not being pejorative, you would be able to tell me, here means we believe in the Lordship of Jesus Christ. We believe in order to be a Christian, you have to have a personal saving relationship with Jesus Christ. You have to believe the Bible. You have to believe that the Bible is fully inspired and inerrant, and etc., etc., etc. They tell you exactly what here means. Tell me what here means at Beatitudes Church.
We're open, we're affirming, we're inclusive, we are excited to start new programs, we have a history of social outreach in the region, we are a very strong church reaching out to many different areas that we founded, not only founded and are still finding, but I thought our mission statement had gotten quite lengthy, so do you want to read the mission statement?
No,
Okay.
I want thank you for that. Others, what does the here mean?
I think
Yes.
Here means just in this building. You're welcome in. Come in with us.
Okay.
Community. I would say it means in community, because, yeah, we do meet here, and we do have a sanctuary here and so forth, but we also have small groups that may meet in a variety of places. So you are welcome here means you're welcome to join into the community in ever which way you see fit or what works with your needs and your
Okay.
talents.
Now, community, I'll come right to you, Mike. Community, in my training with Jim McClendon, community assumes a framework of convictions around which we gather. If I ask you, what are the convictions that gather us together in community, community being Gemeinschaft, from the German, which means people who are bound together by internal connections, versus Gesellschaft, who's the guy that used to pump your gas, but he no longer does, and if he did, you wouldn't know his name anyway, right? That's secondary relationships. If I were to say, what are the things that connect us? What are the things that make us community? You would begin to tell me the stuff that Joyce, we're inclusive, we practice this, we practice that. But that's still a whole lot more ambiguous than the closed set church. Mike?
Well, I was going to say that here infers a wider range of acceptance, that you're not necessarily saying you're welcome here if, and if. It's more you're welcome here and we can listen to what you have to say.
Okay.
And people make that, I think people make that assumption when they come through the door knowing it's a UCC church versus an evangelical church.
Okay. Others?
Well, no one has mentioned that we're guided by Christ's teachings. So I think that has to be part of it.
Guided by Christ's teachings, okay. If I ask you, who is Jesus Christ? what happens to this unity of opinion we have right now? Paul?
There's a big problem. Our history through the congregational situation is tendency to be progressive through the times. We've spun off some important movements.
Yeah?
We've added to the Unitarians. We were interested in colleges at the beginning, and universities. We were interested in open thought. We were children of the Enlightenment to some degree. And we were always willing to allow for diversity in intellectual activity. I think now we're at a crossroads. We don't know what we want. And the truth is that we can say all of these very interesting things, but we really don't believe that because we don't have any substance. If I was to walk in off the street and come to church here, I wouldn't know what to believe because I haven't heard our historical voice for a long time at this church.
What is that historical voice?
The historical voice is, for example, the difference between Jesus and Christ. We put them together. They're not together. The Synoptic Gospels are the teachings of Jesus, and in the last 300 years, we have separated, or people have discovered, that the teachings are different than what come out of the book of John and the book of Paul. I mean, the letters of Paul. Those are much more theistic. The story of Jesus is his parables, and that kind of thing. So there's a difference between Jesus and Christ. Christ wasn't his last name. His mother was not
Mary Christ.
His father was not Joseph Christ. Christ means Messiah.
Yeah.
It means otherworldly.
Jesus the Christ.
Jesus the Christ rather than Jesus Christ.
So if I asked you, congregation, was Jesus God? Raise your hand if you think he was. Okay. If I say to you, was Jesus a wonderful man called of God, but not God? How many of you would buy that? Okay. Here you go. That's what I mean. All are welcome here. There is room in this church, and I'm not going to ask you that. There is room in this church for that diversity of opinion about Jesus the Christ. Okay? I'm good with that. If I were to ask you, and I'm not asking you, but if I were to ask you, do you believe in God? There would be some in our congregation who would raise their hand and say, I'm either agnostic or I'm atheist. And yet they still feel an attraction here. And they are welcome. Question is, how do you create community when you have that tremendous diversity of perspective, viewpoint, and theology? That's one of the reasons I wrote the article I did a while ago where I talked about the distinction between an audience and a congregation. If you have 200 people in the room who are there because they like the sermon, the speaker, Don Longbottom, Peggy, Bill Nelson, Ken, whoever. If that's all the connection, then what you have is an audience. A congregation is more than an audience. A congregation should be a community. So the strength of the close-set congregation of the North Phoenix Baptist Church, if you will, is that they have community. They have a unity of understanding. They have a unified paradigm by which they view reality. But the weakness of it is all aren't really welcome there. I mean, it may say that, but you're truly welcome, fully welcome, only if you can sign on to the paradigm. Over on the open set congregational side, is the strength that you can bring your doubts. You can bring your fears. You can bring your anger. You can bring your diversity, wild ideas. And you're still welcome. But you may not have a sense of community because there's such diversity of viewpoint. And I do think as a congregation, and I see you, Lauren, I do think as a congregation, we struggle with that in some ways, about who are we and how do we connect as a family, as a congregational reality, as a community of faith. Yes, Lauren?
I think something attractive to me about our community here at Church of Beatitudes is that, and this goes into the history of UCC, this community to me is based on intellectual analysis, discussion, and debate about our differences in viewpoints. And then what I think we lack in that community would be combining that with true religious experience and opening that to more emotional approach as well. I think that what Mike Klatt said earlier about assuming that people who walk through the door know they're coming into a UCC and what that means. When I came here, I had no idea what UCC was. I had no understanding of the history or the beliefs, and I think that it would be in great error to make those assumptions about people coming through the door. People come here because they're invited through the music department, they're just invited by a neighbor. We can't make assumptions about people coming through those doors that they understand what our community is. And we need to make that very clear to them and maintain our openness. But as a community, I think we are defined by, and I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name in the middle of the couch, but Paul, thank you.
Call it professor.
But,
Professor of history.
no, I mean, it's true. Our history as a UCC church, which I am gaining understanding in, is one of analysis and deep thought and debate. And I think that is the unifying component of our community.
Okay, Lauren, I want to pick up on something you said. And this is a little bit of a discursion, but I want to make it for a moment. And that is that if you look at the demographics out in the world today, there is a spiritual hunger out there for these younger demographics that we'd like to have in church, but they're not coming into churches, into most churches. And part of what's going on there is that they're looking for the emotional, some of the emotional, and the mystical. They want to encounter the mystery. And most of us in here are very cerebral. We're very rational. And you get nervous if I start talking about primary religious experience, personal encounters with the divine. And some of you will begin to wonder if I ever really left the Southern Baptist Church. Okay? And I want to say to you, and I'm just going to assert this, and you don't have to buy it, but I'm going to say to you and Robinson gets at this when he talks about a new heart in a couple chapters in. I'm going to assert from you that if we, in the progressive wing of the church, in the main line and in the UCC in particular, if we don't find a way to make room for the emotional, the mystical, along with retaining our inclusiveness and our appropriate rationality, we're going to be a footnote in human history. Years ago, I was teaching this Sunday school class, youth class, at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Sonoma while I was in Baptist Seminary. And I was in this class, and I was somehow, it was the Paul piece about speaking in tongues. And I made clear as a Baptist, my saying speaking in tongues is no good. And my 2 youth leaders along with me, wonderful family, a doctor and his wife, said, well, Don, we're charismatic. Whoa. It was one of the first times when I tasted my feet in a professional religious capacity. Since then, I've become a connoisseur of tasting my feet. But that was an early one for me. And I immediately went and I was reading this famous Lutheran scholar, Christopher Stendahl, about that section of the New Testament. And because I knew he would support me. Well, I read something there I'll never forget. And this guy was world-class scholar. He said, any religious tradition that does not experience a frequent infusion of primary religious experience will soon fall by the wayside. We have to make room for, like when Bill Storm a couple of months ago got up and said how he experienced a God moment. And we have to somehow get over our fear that that's going to make us like these television preachers, or back in the old days, put your hands on the radio and get healed. Remember that? That's not us, but at the same time, we have to find a way to allow for the experience of primary religious experience. And I know people say, well, I wished I had that, but I've never had that. I think part of the problem is we've defined that, we've constructed our paradigm such that we don't allow room for it. So we don't experience it. But I don't want to beat that horse anymore right now. It comes up later. I just want to recognize the point that you were making, Lauren, which is good. Okay, closed set, open set. Robinson's third way has to do with the recognition that we need to get beyond, to some extent, the labels of closed set and open set, and especially the labels of progressive versus conservative religion, Democrat, Republican, and independent. Those labels aren't helpful, and he proposes, and this isn't really new, but it's good, that you can orient, you can find community in a church based on having not a set of propositions that you all have to agree to, but primary purpose. Primary purpose. What's the purpose of our church? What's the mission of our church? What is it that draws us together? Now this isn't in Robinson, but I will go back to my old teacher, Jim McClendon, who had the most formative influence on my work of anybody living or dead. Jim wrote a book called Biography as Theology. And the point of the book was, and he used Dog Hammarskjöld, Martin Luther King, Clarence Jordan from Cornelia Farms, and a couple more. What we say we believe doesn't matter much. Your belief system, your theology, is shown in your biography. Biography as theology. And the point is, you can draw a church together. You can form community based on a common ethical commitment. You don't have to work out who you think Jesus is, whether you think Jesus is God or a prophet or was born of a virgin or not born of a virgin. I mean, that's all interesting stuff if you want to study it, but that's not where the rubber meets the road. How do you live? What are the things that we think are important to human life? One of the things that we obviously think as a congregation, I do believe, is that God loves everyone. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight, Democrat or Republican, black or white, male or female. God loves everyone equally. I think that is a purposeful, missional conviction that unifies this church. And I think if you come here, Paul, you mentioned not everyone is welcome here. In reality, that's true in practice. If you come here and you say all homosexuals are going to hell, you're not going to get a comforting reaction. You know? Or if you said only Democrats are going to be in heaven. You know? You're not going to get a comforting reaction. Right? You know, first of all, there'd be a huge argument over what heaven is. So, in reality, everyone can't be welcome here. Because we have some convictional purposes to which we have real allegiance. And part of rebirthing this church, in that sense, is to unearth those pieces around which we really do have a kind of what is it when everybody more or less agrees with it?
Synergizes.
Huh?
Synergizes.
No, there's
Connection.
consensus. Yeah, an operative consensus. And even then, it doesn't mean everybody's on board. But the vast bulk of the body of believers in this place is on board for that consensus. And you use discernment to get there, but that's another day. So, closed set, centered, open set, centered set. Primary purpose. That's part of what we need to unearth and take a look at and raise that up and ask ourselves, is this still our centered set? Are these still the primary purposes for which we do church? You know, and for example, if we say one of our primary purposes going forward is to get younger people in the congregation, then we're going to have to ask ourselves, okay, are there some things we're going to have to do differently in order for that to happen? And then, not me, not Lori, then you, the congregation, make a decision whether or not we want to make the changes that are necessary to attract or to achieve whatever we set out to achieve. And that's got to be your choice. Because in the end, you're the one who does it or doesn't do it. You know, one of the things I've been pushing, and I push in every church, is you need to be invitational. You know, churches grow because people invite friends to church. I can't do that for you. I can be invitational. I met the youth minister at Sing Farm, and if you want great compost, organic compost, have you heard of this place? It's out there at 101 in Thomas. I met the guy. He's crazy as a loon, but he's wonderful. He's in India, not Native American, from India, I think. And he's done all this, and so I went out there to get this dirt, and I'm sitting there, some young man, big guy, bigger than me, comes up to me and starts asking me about this stuff, as I'm telling him. Turns out he's the youth minister of Community of Joy. You know, Walt Cowstead's big mega church. And so I've been to that church a few times in training in past years. So I got to talk to him. I invited him to church here. So come visit some Sunday when you're not working, and let's go do lunch. How are you with that conservative stuff anyway, buddy? He said, well, what's your thing? I said, I'm a liberal. I'm a way liberal, way beyond where you're at. But, I mean, it's just, if you're not invitational, the church ain't going to grow. But I can't, you know, I can do that here and there, but people come to church because somebody in their network invited them. Okay. All right, so you got closed set, open set, centered set, you know, that primary purpose. Okay, so what is the church's primary purpose? In past years, up through the 60s, into the 70s, and some of it's still there, Robinson talks about this, and I agree with him. We had an operative reality called Christendom. And in that time, Protestant churches were the custodians of the national morality. I would have been called to the White House for advice in those years if my church was big enough. Okay? We advised the politicians. They came to us for insights about what is right and what is moral. They don't call us progressives anymore, by and large. They call other people. But mostly that was Christendom. That was when there was an operational relationship between the Protestant church in this country and the national governing apparatus. Culturally, people felt it was a duty to be in church. And remember back in the 50s, if your car was in the driveway on Sunday morning, people would look and wonder, why aren't they in church? And good Lord, they would, they used to, not only would they not have ball games on Sunday morning and not sell alcohol on Sunday morning, they wouldn't have church, they wouldn't have school stuff on Wednesday night, because that was what? That's Christendom, and that's dead. And it ain't coming back. Okay? And part of our job in Christendom, in the mainline churches, we were to create good Christian citizens. We were to teach these young people to obey the law, to behave themselves, and be good people. That's not... Christendom is gone. What aspects of Christendom do you miss? Anybody?
I think that cohesiveness, where you feel like everybody understands that you're talking about the same things when you're talking to each other.
You had a common language.
And then people, because of that, more people cared about each other and cared about you, and there was more community.
Yeah.
In that sense.
There was. Yes?
That was only if you conformed.
Yeah.
That's true. A good point. If you conform, yeah. It was more close set in that sense, wasn't it? You were supposed to conform. I remember in 1972, young man I was teaching at Lassen Junior High was a long-term substitute in PE for a class that got out of control, because I was big and ornery. And this young kid came to me crying, this young African-American kid, because he was being ostracized, because he was a Jehovah's Witness, and he wasn't supposed to stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag and stuff. And he was catching holy heck about it in the class, and he wondered what I thought. And I said, that's your faith, man. You got to honor that. But they talk about taking prayer out of the classrooms and this and that. Well, that's the reason prayer and stuff was taken out of the classroom, is because we're a pluralistic nation. We didn't realize that as much back in the days of Christendom. You could be Buddhist or Jewish or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever, but you were going to be ostracized for it, and you were going to have to listen to a Christian prayer. Well, now that's changed, and there are some losses with that. There are also some gains that we don't implicitly put down these people who have a different viewpoint. Someone else was going to say something. Yes?
Speaking of things we miss, is that the children were brought to church.
Yes.
It was given that the children were brought to church. And our young families now, there's all kinds of sports going on Sunday, and they work on Sunday, or they work on Saturday. Like you say, it's a different world.
And that's a loss.
It's a whole new paradigm.
Yeah, it's a loss. The thing I miss most about Christendom is the larger culture leaving our Sundays alone. And they don't. I mean, these mega churches, these huge churches. One of the people say, why are they able to do these things we don't do? Well, one reason is because they have their own ball teams. They have their own leagues. They have their own bowling alleys. They have their own little restaurants. They have an alternative culture. They have a subculture within the larger culture. And it's one way to address that.
It's also easier to believe you're right about everything than you have to accept some other way. So you see the larger mega church, which are generally evangelical, are conservative, they're somewhat self-centered in that they have their own community, and they're easy to criticize gays, they can criticize Arabs. There's a lot of people that they're right about, and I think it's easier to be in a group where everybody thinks you're right, rather than a group.
It's
like
the old
ours, where you
echo
have to know
chamber
what's
thing. You know, just like in church conflict. You know, you have one group will be convinced of one thing and another group will be convinced of another, and then if there's a vote or something, they're all shocked by the outcome because they just talk to each other. You know, everywhere I've been, where I've dealt with comedy, they talk to each other. And same thing, you know, one church coming out of Fuller School of Theology in the 70s was the McGavran School of Church Growth, and it was basically birds of a feather flock together. And you got these homogeneous groups, and you got them into church, and you had a church for straight white males and females. Grew that church. The only problem with that growth method is worked. It's hard to integrate a church racially, but the harder thing to do beyond that is to integrate a church socioeconomically. But the fact of the matter is, the only problem with that school of church growth that says go homogeneous is it ain't Christian. It's inconsistent with the book of Acts. Everybody's welcome in God's church. It's not about homogeneous groupings. Okay. All right. We live in a post-Christian culture. There are some losses. There's also a huge gain, in my opinion, is if you're here, it's because you want to be here. Okay? Not because someone's passing judgment on you if you don't come. Maybe some of us still carry that voice in the back of our heads, but most people don't. If they're here, it's because they're choosing to be here. And I think that's a good thing. Now, Robinson makes the point that this loss of Christendom has forced us to revert to our original mission. He's speaking out for Christianity what I think Beatitudes Church needs to do for itself. And that means what was our original mission? Now, for Tony, and I happen to agree with this, the original mission of the church was the creation of and nurture of disciples. You know, that great commission that evangelical churches like to talk about is go ye into all the world and do what? Make what? Disciples. Now, it doesn't mean make converts. Oh, I love Jesus, I give my heart to Jesus, I'm done. That's not what it says. It says make disciples. That's a big deal. The call to the church is to create and nurture disciples. When I do confirmation or I do new member classes, I talk continuously to them about the church being a greenhouse. What's a greenhouse? That's a place where you take these little seeds, you germinate them, you give them the compost and the organic fertilizer and the water and the shade in summer and the warmth in winter, and you grow great trees of faith. Or out here, a saguaro cactus of faith. Okay, that I believe, Tony believes and I believe, was the original intention of God's church. The creation and nurture of disciples. And what is the purpose of discipleship? Healing and mending God's creation. Paul talks about it when he says he's torn down, Jesus Christ has torn down the wall that divides us. He's talking about Jew, Gentile, male, female, slave free. But healing and mending God's creation all the way from environmental concerns to social people concerns. But I want to ask you a question. Are we at Beatitudes Church structured to effectively teach and nurture disciples? Or, if you will, do you have an alternative mission for us?
I think the church is structured to nurture disciples, but I think it's hard to find prospects because there's so many other options and people don't have that social pressure to be part of a church. And again, we're in a position as a church where we're not saying we have this narrow set of values and those are the right values. We're in a church that looks at a wider set of values, and some people are uncomfortable with that.
Okay. Let me sharpen this question a little bit. I don't disagree with you, but I bring to, I think potential disciples are attracted to people who are in the process themselves of being disciples. Are we empowering discipleship within the existing congregation as we now have it? Do we have a mission, a viewpoint, a commitment to being disciples ourselves?
I say yes.
Others?
I don't see any movement in that direction in this church. I see people coming here because their friends are here, because of what we do here, the music. They talk about the music and that sort of thing. And I don't see anything within the community going out and doing new things. When I talk to everybody here, they talk about DeWitt. They talk about the campus. They talk about what the church used to do, not what the church is looking forward to doing. And even though I was on a different side, I will have to say that our prior ministers were talking about going out and doing things in the community. And I think that that's what we have to do. I don't think the political part of it was, or the economic part of it was valid, but I do believe that they had a draft. We may find out, if they're successful, that that's the best $1 million we ever spent in starting that new congregation. Because if they go out and get their hands dirty, they will do things. And one of the things that I think is true with young people is they don't like the institutional church any more than they like any other institution.
Bingo. Yeah.
But they'll get ready to go out and feed the poor and go out and give water to the people in the desert. They're willing to do all of that.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to survive in the long haul, we've got to find a way of doing it, because our churches otherwise are going to be smaller and smaller in congregations, and there's going to be a lot of real estate on the market in every corner. The best real estate in town was built during the time of Christendom. Now, the churches are empty, they're barely holding on. And when they do sell, they sell to a congregation that is fired up, but it may temporarily be that way rather than in the long haul. But if we can latch on to this enthusiasm for spirituality and get away from our institutional thing that was, you know, it was developed a long time ago in 325 or 381 with the councils of the early church. Those things are past. And I think everybody's going to have that kind of experience, so that our churches as such are very poor investment, because there's not much way to pay the bills.
Okay. What about the rest of you? Are we practicing discipleship? Do we have a vision to be followers of Christ and making that the primary function of our lives? Anyone? Nancy?
I think Paul hit on a word that I would use to describe that we are in the midst of, is creating spirituality. I find it lacking in the church, in our church. Why? I can't put my finger on it, but I think in our desire to be intellectual and to have an intellectualized faith, we are missing the holiness, the spirituality of the church that brings us to do the things that Christ would have us to do. It's not just a club to do good work, but it needs to have a foundation, and I think that is a spiritual foundation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Others?
I
Barb?
feel differently than Paul does. I have so many experiences here in this church with people who have come forth and carried on through things in our discipleship. Reaching out, taking charge of things that are extraordinary. Chris Nyman with Family Promise, the things that Dosha has brought to us over the years. And I could go on and on about experiences that I have felt here in this church that went beyond and above any experience I've had in my life. And this is why I'm here.
Good, great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Others, discipleship. Lori?
I think we have a great many people in this church, Chris being one of them, who definitely walks in that path and just epitomizes discipleship and putting effort forth and making a difference in the world. I think that we have that core group. I think we've got a great many people who have in the past been there and done that, and you know they're downsizing their homes and downsizing their lives, and that's probably part of it. But I don't know whether you're all aware, this year the board voted, we put, I think it's $30,000 into our budget for this year, for 2014, and that is to be provided as matching money for anybody in our church who proposes a new mission for this church. In other words, any off-the-wall idea, you know, if that group or individual or couple of people, whatever, raises money, the church will match that to enter into new missions. And I see kind of all sides of this. I see that this church does a lot of mission work, but we're not incubating new missions. And I don't think that, you know, because we have such a strong relationship with the campus and Duet and ICM, I think that sometimes people come in and they don't see the flavor of mission quite that they're looking for, or you know, more physical, more active. You know, there are a myriad of things that draw people to mission, and a myriad of things that matter. So I think this year we have an opportunity to foster some new missions, and I think that can really get the ball rolling for younger people to let them shape what our missions will be in the future.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
I would say that the unique and successful component to some of the mission and discipleship work that people in our church have been doing, again, I'll use Chris Nyman as an example, is these, I'm sorry, Chris. But she meets people where they are.
With that halo on the top.
But she meets people where they are. We as a church, talking about the entire church, are expecting people to come to us so that they can experience the discipleship we have to offer. In these other mission cases, those people are going out and serving outside of the church. So when we're talking about our church and our structure of discipleship, it needs to extend beyond Sunday morning from 9 to 10 in the sanctuary. And so when your original question was, is our church set up, do we have the structure in place for discipleship? And I would say no.
One of the things that comes out, I talk about it later, but and I won't get to it today. But UCC churches are running a percentage of about 20 to 30% of membership numbers in church on any given Sunday. Probably closer to 20 than 30. Now, by definition, you who are here today are a different group than that. But I'd say, you know, when you look for correlations, a membership attendance of 20% of the time, in my opinion, isn't an indicator for the most part of being serious about following after Christ. Either that or one doesn't see worship as being a significant part of that. So I do think, you know, back with the Mennonites, for example, I had a Bible study on Wednesday, a morning session and an evening session. I had 100 at each of those. There are different cultural ideas about, and I'm not saying Bible study is the answer per se, but what I'm driving at is I think progressive Christianity, I'm one. This is a critique from within. We have an issue with people gathering themselves together for worship. It's a far lower ratio than I think is healthy. Let me move on a bit. What time do we have to wind this up? Huh?
5 minutes.
Okay, let me get this one more piece in. Robinson talks about modernity. By modernity, he means from the Enlightenment to the 60s or 70s, okay? This is post-modernity, and I'll explain that distinction in a moment. He says, modernity emphasized, and we're all children. Everybody here is a child, well, maybe not Lauren, but most all of us here, with a few exceptions, are the children of modernity, where rationality was emphasized at the experience of spirituality and emotion. We were taught to be thinkers. Postmoderns, and a lot of you will realize this if you've studied social science, postmoderns have realized and lived with and birthed into the insights of social science, which clearly indicate there is no objective, there's no absolute objectivity. There are different paradigms, different spectacles that we bring to view reality, and we all have a pair of spectacles on that's unique. So there is no absolute objectivity. These postmoderns, these post-constructionist kids, young people, young adults, they want to hear from the heart. They desire to experience mystery. I think Trinity, in some places like Trinity Cathedral, they get a lot of young people in. They're attracted to the transcendent mystery of the liturgy. At any rate, this desire to experience mystery has created a crisis in the main line. Because we've had a whale of a hard time converting and retaining our young people. What do you think? You have any thoughts about that? Jerry?
Yeah, I have a couple of things that may or may not be directly related to that. One is people can come to the church, walk in the door, go to church, and walk out, and not really interact with the folks that are here very much. They do have in common what the corporate worship service that we all do together, but unless they get involved in at least one of the sub-organizations in the church, why they don't really get to know anybody very well. And so that's one of the weaknesses in the community. So it's possible that what needs to happen is to have more organizations, smaller organizations, where can get to know people a little better, at least know who they are, or what their name is, and something about it.
Okay. What was your other one?
Agree.
I'll come back to you. I do the same thing. Leroy?
Our son, I'm 78, so he's 40. Was born and bred in the church and followed parents all his life. As he became a young adult, he was less interested in the institutional church. Came to Christmas Eve several years ago here.
Yeah.
He was so turned off that he's not been back since. And because we don't drive at night, we needed transportation down to First Church for Jeff Durham's ordination service. Some of you know of Jeff Durham. He's been involved in this church to a certain degree. He's gay. He was ordained about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Our son was moved by the mysterium tremendum of that service like he's never been in his life. And it had to do with what built up to the laying on of hands, and the sense of mysterium tremendum that transcended all of our local garbage, and transported him to a new place. He hasn't been back to church since, but he knows there's space where he belongs. And I think he's an illustration, you're referring to some of the younger generation, that is looking for more than they're finding in the institutional church.
Yeah.
And as a pastor, and pastor emeritus of this church, I'm very well aware, as I look back, that I was a maintainer. My wife said to me once, let's face it, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, no church you were pastor of really grew all that much. And the church did not grow all that much. Whereas the church we went to out of seminary gained 100 members a year for a number of years because it was on the cutting edge of newness. And Christendom was still alive and well. And you didn't have all these intrusions that have since compromised. I think that what we're lacking, as another way of saying what's already been said, is a sense of mission and purpose that transcends our differences and our diversity. It calls us beyond ourselves to a new sense of future that we're excited about. And it's not going to be an extension of the old future. It's going to be a whole new brand.
Hence the rebirth.
And I don't know what that is yet,
Yeah.
but I think that it seems to me that compelling sense of mission and vision is what built this church.
Yes.
And is needed to be reborn, but in new forms.
Okay.
Not repetitious.
Mike, I know you're getting antsy, but I want to close this out. I want to emphasize something here. First of all, it's been a great discussion from my perspective. It's not a matter of a new technique. It's not a matter of, oh my God, if we just had that program or that personality or this or that little thing. It gets to what Leroy and many of you were getting at, and it is the organism itself has to be vital. Okay? It has to, God forgive me for using this phrase, it has to be on fire. We have to have enough heat going on around here that we're infectious. And when you do that, when you get in touch with whatever is your passion, our passion as a congregation, something happens, and you become an attractive alternative to the dominant culture. And when you have that juice in the system going on, that heat, that passion, then those programs that you do, that you establish to do certain things, attract people. the campus is wonderful, ICM is wonderful. All these institutional structures that we put together in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s are wonderful. But they are not what's going to make the future of this church. It has to be what we engender going forward. It's up to us. Okay? Are you inviting me here the last Sunday of next month too?
Probably have to talk to the group and see what they think about
Okay.
that.
Well, I am interested in venues to have this discussion, whether it's on campus or whatever, preferably during the day, but in the evening if necessary. But we've got to reach out into the congregation. We've got to quote unquote create a movement if we want to effectively rebirth this church. Yes, Lauren, briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. It's my concern that you may isolate some people who work full-time, especially the younger crowd.
That's why I said that evening if necessary, or after church, a different place, whatever. Yeah, no, I understand that. Okay, God bless, go in peace.